Sarah Chen stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror at 6:47 a.m., 3 cups of coffee already coursing through her system. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, despite 8 hours in bed, and her jeans felt tighter around the waist than they had just 2 weeks ago. The irony wasn't lost on her, a financial analyst who could predict market trends but couldn't figure out why her body felt like it was slowly betraying her. Her phone buzzed with another productivity podcast notification. Optimize your morning 5 a.m. workouts that changed everything. She swiped it away, exhausted by the endless cycle of motivation that never seemed to stick. 3 gym memberships in 2 years, 4 different diet apps, and a drawer full of abandoned supplement bottles told the story of her perpetual restart Monday syndrome. On the subway to her downtown Chicago office, Sarah noticed something unusual. Kenji, her quiet colleague from the Tokyo branch who was visiting for 3 months, sat 2 seats away with his eyes closed. Not scrolling, not checking emails, just sitting in what appeared to be complete calm while the train screeched through morning rush hour chaos. His posture was relaxed, yet alert, and somehow he looked more rested at 7:30 a.m. than she felt after her 3rd espresso. When Kenji opened his eyes at their stop, Sarah caught herself staring. He moved differently than the other commuters. No hurried checking of phones, no anxious glances at his watch. Just steady, measured steps, as if he had all the time in the world. "You always look so calm," Sarah found herself saying as they walked toward their building. Kenji smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "My grandmother used to say that rushing through life makes you miss the life you're rushing toward." That evening, Sarah sat in her cramped studio apartment, laptop glowing at 9 p.m. as she finished quarterly reports. Her dinner, a sad desk salad and energy bar, sat half-eaten beside a stack of work papers. She thought about Kenji's calm presence on the train and wondered what his grandmother might think of her life, a constant sprint toward weekend recovery that never quite came. In the small kitchen, she opened the cabinet where her grandmother's dishes sat unused behind everyday plates and takeout containers. Her fingers traced the edge of a small ceramic bowl, white with delicate blue mountains painted along the rim. She could almost hear Nainai's voice, "Eat with intention, not distraction." The bowl felt substantial in her hands, its weight somehow reassuring in a way that her oversized dinner plates never were. Sarah had inherited the bowl set after her grandmother's passing 2 years ago, but they'd remained decorative, too precious for daily use, she'd told herself. Too small, really, for the portions that modern life seemed to demand. But holding this one bowl now, she wondered if there was wisdom in its size that she'd been missing. If you've ever felt tired, even after a full night of sleep, or frustrated with diets that don't last, tell us in the comments which part of this story feels familiar. And stay with us for the next chapters. The next morning, Sarah found herself watching Kenji more carefully during their shared coffee break. While she nursed her 4th cup of the day, he sipped slowly from a small thermos, savoring each mouthful like it contained something precious. The thermos itself was unremarkable, brushed steel with no logos or motivational slogans, but the ritual around it felt deliberate. "What are you drinking?" she asked, curious about the faint herbal scent that drifted between them. "Genmai cha, brown rice tea," Kenji explained, offering her the thermos cap filled with the pale golden liquid. "My wife sends it from home. She says American coffee makes me too energetic." Sarah tasted it tentatively. It was nutty, warm, and somehow grounding, nothing like the bitter rocket fuel she'd been consuming since college. "It's so mild. How does it wake you up?" "Maybe waking up isn't about more energy," Kenji said thoughtfully. "Maybe it's about being present with the energy you have." That afternoon, Sarah's usual 3 p.m. crash hit harder than normal. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for her desk drawer stash of protein bars and energy drinks, the familiar cycle of spike and crash that had become her default relationship with food. Across the office, Kenji worked steadily. No snacks in sight. his energy seeming to maintain a consistent level rather than the roller coaster she'd accepted as normal. During her lunch break, instead of eating at her desk while answering emails, Sarah took an unusual step. She walked to the small Japanese market 3 blocks away. The shop smelled of miso and seaweed, and the elderly woman behind the counter moved with the same unhurried precision she'd noticed in Kenji. "Brown rice tea?" the woman asked, understanding Sarah's clumsy pronunciation. "Ah, genmai cha. Very good for calm energy. Not like coffee. Up, down, up, down." She made a jagged gesture with her hand, then smoothed it into a gentle wave. That evening, Sarah did something she hadn't done in months. She turned off her laptop at 6 p.m. In her kitchen, she filled her grandmother's small bowl with leftover stir-fry, surprised by how the portion looked complete rather than sparse. She brewed her first cup of genmai cha and sat at her small table instead of on the couch in front of Netflix. The bowl felt different in her hands during the meal. Its size forced her to eat more slowly, to actually chew rather than shovel food while distracted. By the time she finished, she felt satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with fullness and everything to do with presence. The tea, sipped between bites, seemed to extend the meal into something resembling meditation. Her phone buzzed with work emails, but for the first time in years, Sarah let them wait. She washed the small bowl carefully, dried it with attention, and placed it in the front of her cabinet where she could see it. Tomorrow, she decided, she would use it again. 3 weeks into her small ritual of evening tea and meals from the ceramic bowl, Sarah began noticing changes that felt too subtle to be real. Her 3 p.m. energy crashes had softened into gentle dips rather than complete collapses. She was still drinking coffee, but somehow 2 cups felt sufficient where 4 had once been barely adequate. The real test came during a late-night work emergency that would have previously sent her into a spiral of stress eating and caffeinated panic. Instead, she found herself brewing genmai cha and eating a simple dinner from her grandmother's bowl while reviewing the crisis documents. The familiar weight of the ceramic in her hands seemed to anchor her nervous system, allowing her to think clearly rather than react frantically. "You seem different," her friend Maya observed during their weekly dinner. "Less frazzled." Sarah laughed, but Maya's observation stuck with her. She did feel different, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly how. Her clothes fit the same. Her weight hadn't dramatically changed, but something fundamental in her relationship with food and rest had shifted. Kenji noticed too. "You move more like someone from home now," he commented one morning as they walked from the subway. "Not so rushed." "Is that good or bad?" Sarah asked. "In Tokyo, we have a saying, hasten slowly. Speed without awareness is just chaos." That weekend, Sarah's sister Emma visited, bringing her usual whirlwind energy and strong opinions about Sarah's lifestyle choices. Emma immediately noticed the small bowl on the drying rack and the canister of Japanese tea on the counter. "Are you on some kind of Asian diet now?" Emma asked, her tone carrying the skepticism that Sarah recognized from her own internal voice. "Because you know these fad things never last, right?" Sarah felt a familiar urge to defend herself, to minimize the changes or laugh them off as insignificant. Instead, she poured Emma a cup of genmai cha and served dinner in 2 of her grandmother's bowls. "I'm just eating dinner," she said simply. "The way Nai taught us." Emma picked at her food, clearly uncomfortable with the smaller portion and the slower pace that the bowl seemed to naturally impose. "This is so little food," she complained, "and this tea tastes like nothing. Don't you miss normal portions, normal coffee?" Sarah considered the question seriously. She did miss the immediate hit of strong coffee and the temporary satisfaction of large portions, but she didn't miss the afternoon crashes, the restless nights, or the constant feeling that her body was fighting against her rather than working with her. That night, as Emma scrolled through her phone while eating ice cream from the container, Sarah sipped her tea and reflected on how foreign her old habits now seemed. The genmai cha, tasted like calm to her now, like space between thoughts. The small bowl had become a practice in paying attention rather than filling up. Would you rather force yourself with willpower or redesign your environment and habits like this character is learning to do? Comment which path makes more sense to you, and share this episode with someone who needs a gentler approach to change. 2 months into her quiet transformation, Sarah faced her first real test. A major client crisis required 3 consecutive weeks of 12-hour days and weekend work. Her old pattern would have meant surviving on delivery food, endless coffee, and whatever snacks she could grab between meetings. Instead, she found herself adapting her rituals to the chaos. She brought her thermos of genmai cha to the office and sipped it during video calls. When the team ordered pizza for late-night work sessions, she served herself a portion in her grandmother's bowl, now small enough to fit in her work bag, and ate mindfully even while surrounded by the usual grab-and-go energy. Her colleagues noticed. "How are you not completely wired right now?" asked Marcus, her cube neighbor, as he opened his 3rd energy drink of the afternoon. "I feel like I'm going to vibrate out of my skin." Sarah looked up from her bowl of simple soup and rice. I think I'm tired," she said honestly, "but it's a different kind of tired than I used to feel." It was true. The exhaustion from long work days felt clean somehow, like physical fatigue rather than the bone-deep depletion she'd once accepted as normal. The genmai cha didn't give her the spike and crash of coffee, but it also didn't leave her feeling wrung out and jittery. Kenji, working equally long hours during the crisis, seemed to maintain his steady energy throughout. One evening, as they were among the last people in the office, Sarah asked him directly, "How do you do this without burning out?" "In Japan, we have something called forest bathing, being present in nature. But I think any ritual can be forest bathing if you pay attention," he said, gesturing to her small bowl. "Your grandmother's bowl is like this for you, yes?" Sarah realized he was right. The bowl had become her anchor, a way of creating calm in the middle of chaos. Using it was like taking a small retreat 3 times a day, a pause that reset her nervous system even when everything around her was urgent. During the final week of the crisis, Sarah's old patterns tried to resurface. The vending machine called to her at 2 p.m. The urge to order a massive dinner and eat it while watching TV felt overwhelming after particularly stressful days. But each time she returned to the bowl, to the tea, to the ritual that had quietly become her new normal. By the time the project wrapped, Sarah realized something profound had shifted. She hadn't white-knuckled her way through the stress. She'd moved through it with tools that actually worked. Her sleep had been shorter but deeper. Her eating had been simpler but more satisfying. Her energy had been lower but more sustainable. The ceramic bowl, now slightly chipped from daily use and travel, sat on her desk as she finished the final reports. Its blue mountain design seemed to promise something she was just beginning to understand, that wellness wasn't about perfection or extremes, but about creating small pockets of mindfulness in an overwhelming world. 6 months after that first subway observation of Kenji's calm presence, Sarah sat in her doctor's office reviewing blood work that surprised them both. Her stress markers had dropped significantly, her sleep quality indicators had improved, and her metabolic numbers showed the kind of steady optimization that usually required dramatic lifestyle overhauls. "What have you been doing differently?" Dr. Martinez asked, scrolling through the results on her tablet. "Your cortisol levels are completely different from your last visit." Sarah thought about how to explain that she'd changed almost nothing and almost everything simultaneously. "I started eating from smaller bowls and drinking tea instead of so much coffee." Dr. Martinez looked skeptical. "That's it? And I started paying attention while I eat. No screens, no multitasking. Just eating." The doctor nodded slowly. "The research on mindful eating is actually quite strong. Slower eating activates different neural pathways, improves digestion, affects hormone signaling. But most people can't sustain it because they try to force it as a diet rule rather than making it a natural part of their environment. That weekend, Sarah finally understood what had really changed. It wasn't the bowl itself, or even the tea. It was the way these simple tools had redesigned her relationship with her own nervous system. Instead of constantly pushing through fatigue and stress, she'd learned to create small islands of calm that accumulated into something bigger. She thought about her grandmother, who had lived through war and displacement, but always insisted on setting the table properly, on eating together as a family, on treating food as something sacred rather than fuel to be consumed mindlessly. The small bowl wasn't just about portion control, it was about reverence. Kenji's assignment in Chicago was ending, and the office threw him a goodbye lunch. As colleagues shared stories about his calm influence on their work culture, Sarah realized how much his presence had given her permission to slow down, to question the American assumption that intensity and caffeine were the only paths to productivity. "The bowl ritual suits you," Kenji told her privately as they cleared their lunch dishes. "But I think you know now it was never about the bowl." He was right. Over the past months, the practice had expanded beyond meals. She'd started turning off screens an hour before bed, not as a rigid rule, but as an extension of the same mindfulness. She'd begun walking to work when weather allowed, savoring the transition between home and office rather than rushing through it. She'd learned to recognize the difference between physical hunger and emotional restlessness. Most surprisingly, she'd stopped thinking about weight loss, body optimization, or performance hacking. The small bowl had taught her that her body was something to collaborate with, not dominate. The Genmai Cha had shown her that energy could be steady rather than manic. The evening rituals had revealed that rest was productive, not lazy. That night, as Sarah prepared her simple dinner and brewed her tea, she realized the profound shift that had occurred. She'd spent years trying to force her body into compliance through willpower and restriction. But her grandmother's bowl had taught her a different approach, creating an environment where healthy choices felt natural, even inevitable. The bowl's blue mountains caught the lamplight as she ate in comfortable silence, no longer worried about eating too much or too little, no longer anxious about tomorrow's energy or productivity. Just present with the taste of rice and vegetables, the warmth of tea, the satisfaction of a day lived with attention rather than urgency. 1 year later, Sarah's small studio apartment had transformed into something that would have surprised her former self. The kitchen counter held a simple wooden tea tray, a small electric kettle, and canisters of various Japanese teas that a co-worker now brought back from business trips. The dining table, once a repository for mail and laptop charging cords, was clear except for a single placemat and her grandmother's bowl, ready for the evening meal. The changes had rippled outward in ways she hadn't anticipated. Maya had started asking about the tea, eventually incorporating her own evening ritual of herbal infusions and technology breaks. Her sister Emma, initially skeptical, had borrowed one of the smaller bowls during a stressful period and admitted that it somehow made her feel less frantic about eating. Most remarkably, Sarah's relationship with her work had shifted. She still worked hard, but the manic quality of her previous productivity had been replaced by something more sustainable. Her colleagues had noticed her different energy, present during meetings, less reactive to urgent emails, somehow more effective despite appearing less stressed. Dr. Martinez had become genuinely curious about the intersection of cultural practices and metabolic health, even asking Sarah to speak to other patients about environmental approaches to wellness rather than purely behavioral ones. "The amazing thing," Dr. Martinez had said during their latest checkup, "is that your changes seem to have compound interest. Each small shift supported the next one." It was true. The bowl had led to mindful eating, which had improved her sleep, which had stabilized her energy, which had reduced her need for caffeine, which had calmed her nervous system, which had made her more resilient to stress. None of the changes had felt difficult because each one had been supported by the previous shifts. On this particular evening, Sarah prepared her dinner with the same quiet attention that had become second nature. The ceramic bowl, now showing gentle wear from daily use, felt like an extension of her own hands. As she served herself rice and steamed vegetables, she remembered the frantic person who used to eat standing over the sink while checking emails. Her phone sat in another room, charging for the night. Her laptop was closed. The only sounds were the gentle bubble of the kettle and the soft scrape of chopsticks against ceramic, eating utensils she'd gradually adopted, not from any cultural appropriation impulse, but because they naturally slowed her eating pace. As she sipped her genmai cha and reflected on the year's transformation, Sarah felt a deep gratitude for her grandmother's wisdom that had waited patiently in a kitchen cabinet until she was ready to receive it. The small bowl had taught her that healing didn't require dramatic gestures or perfect discipline, just consistent attention to the smallest daily acts. Outside her window, Chicago's evening chaos continued. Sirens, traffic, the general urgency of a city that never stopped moving. But inside her small apartment, time moved differently. Each meal was a meditation, each cup of tea a reminder that there was another way to live in a demanding world. The bowl's blue mountains seemed to glow softly in the lamplight, holding space for the quiet revolution that had transformed not just Sarah's health, but her entire relationship with the rushing world around her. If this story reminded you that real transformation comes from small habits repeated over time, not from overnight fixes, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to start this journey with you in the next story.